So this is today's work. The syllabus calendar says that today we are dealing with encoding and decoding displays of emotion. And that is what we will do. But the first item up there is left over from 2 weeks ago. You may recall that I got confused and I thought class ended 20 minutes before it actually does. And you all found your partners for the assignments. But what I did not get to when we talked about interaction, I said several weeks ago that there is a new model of how we use nonverbals in face-to-face conversation, and it is challenging the model of taking turns. Good morning. So we talked about the turn-taking model, and you can nonverbally request a turn, maintain your turn, you can yield a turn, or you can deny a turn. That model of nonverbals in face-to-face conversation has been around since the 1970s. But more recent work by a professor at the University of British Columbia named Janet Bevan-Bavalas, she has started to challenge that. Now, I don't have very many visuals to explain this model. It's something easily demonstrated and easily observed. You will see it going on in conversations you have with your friends, with your professors, your boss, your family. It happens a lot. So I'm originally from the United States, right? Okay, when I said that, she nodded. When you have conversations with people at the beginning, when you're laying out basic facts, people do simple things like nod. They might also vocalize. Professor Bevan-Bavalas did her work in Canada and some in the United States with English speakers, and the vocalization is So I'm from the United States, right? And after you lay out the basic facts, or I almost missed something, she called that grounding. Because I say something and I watch to see if you understood it. And if you nod, and if an English speaker, if you say, and in other parts of the world, there are different vocalizations. There's been a lot of work on Japanese vocalizations, aizuchi. They're not identical, but they do the same thing. They tell the speaker, I understand what you said enough that you can continue. Professor Bevan-Bavalas noticed at the beginning of a conversation, the grounding cue will be vague. It will be broad. It will be general purpose. A good English word for it is, it will be generic. Generic is the opposite of specific. So you'll start a lot of conversations if the other person is talking and you'll say, no matter what they're saying. But then they'll get to the important part. They'll get to the part that they were excited to tell you about. So I was driving to work this morning. And as I was driving past a school, a little 8-year-old ran right out in front of me. Now, when they say that, you're not going to say, You're going to react. Oh, no. Something specific to what they say. Or they might say, and I saw a 10,000 yen note on the sidewalk. And you don't respond to that with, You respond to it with, wow. Or something that shows excitement. You respond specifically to what they said. Professor Bevan-Bavalas videoed thousands of hours of conversation and said, it always goes from generic to specific, and once it turns from generic to specific, it never goes back. And she called that a grounding cycle. And then she did an experiment. And this experiment is wonderfully evil. I find this experiment so entertaining. She brought participants into her laboratory, and then she would flip a coin, and she would tell two participants sitting in the same room, you will be the speaker, you will be the listener. But then she would privately tell the listener, count the number of words that the speaker says that have the letter T in the word. We're going to watch the video later on, and we will also count the words with T in them. And if you give us the correct number, we'll give you 7,000 yen. What you got from that was listeners who the entire time the speaker was talking just kept going, and never got specific because they couldn't pay attention to what the speaker was actually saying. They were too busy counting words that had the letter T in them. She recorded all these conversations, and here's what she found. When the listener is giving the wrong feedback that shows they are distracted, the speaker doesn't talk as long, the speaker loses their train of thought far more often, gets confused about what they're trying to say, and cannot tell it in an organized fashion. The speaker becomes visibly emotional, upset, reports afterward they did not enjoy the conversation. And what this challenged about the model of turn-taking, the turn-taking model strongly suggests that the only one communicating is the speaker. You take a turn and you talk. Someone else wants to talk, so they request a turn. And you yield a turn and they talk. But the grounding cycles model says the listener is communicating just as much as the speaker, because speakers do not do an effective job of speaking if the listener is not assuring them that they are being understood. Now, the week before last, I actually delivered a talk here on Zoom. It's recorded, and I plan to put a link to that recording on Moodle. It's not assigned, but if this interests you, you can hear me talk about a half hour on it. There are 2 other researchers who've taken that finding and gone in some very interesting directions. One of them, Monisha Pasupati at the University of Utah. She has shown, by collecting a lot of data, that people your age, about 18 to 25, let me take a step back. Commonly, people at 18 to 25 years of age feel unsure, confused, lack confidence about what you want to do with your life, how to make major decisions about things like getting married, lack confidence about buying a home or where you want to live. All those are very difficult in that window, 18 to 25. But her data shows every time someone listens to you as you talk through those struggles, as you talk about what you think and what you're confused about, your confidence grows, and it grows a lot. Not a little bit, a lot. And the quality of the listening makes a difference. If the listener is distracted, you don't get the beneficial effect. But if the listener is paying careful attention and giving good grounding cues, young adults come out of those conversations far more sure of what they want to do with their lives. Back in the United States, every fall, I teach an upper division class aimed at juniors and seniors, all about listening research. And when I get to this set of findings, I tell my students, those friends of yours that are the best part of your life right now, you can bless all of them so powerfully. You don't have to solve their problems for them, just listen to them. Because the research shows, this is not even just a grumpy old man with an opinion. The research shows the quality of the listening they receive is what builds their confidence in their adult identity. That's one application. The other one, and there we go, the other one's even more exciting. There's a researcher in Israel named Guy Itzikov. He's at the University of Haifa. He got interested, it's kind of a long story how, but he got interested in people with very sharp attitudes. So I hate spicy food. Can't understand how anybody can like spicy food. I hate the World Cup. I hate football. I hate sports. Why are people so crazy about the World Cup? Sharp attitudes. I really love or I really hate. And it led to him being interested in people who hate other groups of people. I hate this race. I hate this people of this sexual orientation. I hate people from this country. He's in Israel, and one of the interests he had was people who hate Palestinians. What he found was, when people talk about attitudes like that, I really love or I really hate, if they feel like they have to defend it, the attitude gets stronger. But when they don't feel like they have to defend it and they get to just talk about why they feel that way, very often that attitude gets weaker. So he did a fascinating study in the fall of 2021, or actually 2020, so this is very recent. He recruited people who could say that they hated black people, homeless people, gay people, transgender people, or Palestinians. They were invited to participate in the study if they would affirm that one of those groups they hated. And when they arrived, they were asked to complete what's called the attitude thermometer. It's basically just a scale of 1 to 5, or 0 to 5, and it's blue up to red. And you use it to show how strong your attitude is. And people said, my hatred of the group that I identified when you invited me to the study is at a 4 or a 5. Everybody said that coming in the door. 4 or 5, bright red. And then they were invited to just talk about why. And there was a control group with a distracted listener. And with the distracted listener, they would talk and they would get angry and they would work themselves up. And at the end of talking about it, they would again do the attitude thermometer and they were at a 4 or a 5. But in the experimental condition, someone listened to them very attentively, non-judgmentally, no angry emotions, no look of shock or distress, just listened. And as they talked, they would say things like, why do the Palestinians hate us? Why do they always try to kill us? But on the other hand, there's this Palestinian family just down the block from me. They're such hard workers and they're such warm and loving people. Maybe I'm not being fair. And as they talked, they would realize the contradictions and problems with their own attitude. And at the end of that listening experience, they completed the attitude thermometer again, and their dislike had gone down to a 3 or a 2. Just the experience of talking while someone listened weakened that polarized attitude. So all of that is what I had left over from the last time the class met. There's Janet Bevan-Babalas and her research into grounding cycles, Monisha Pasupati and hers into developing adult identity, and Guy Itzikov and his work on how high-quality listening tends to tone down very polarized attitudes. Again, if this interests you, I will put the longer presentation up on Moodle, and if you have half an hour and nothing better to do, you can listen to it. I have the studies available if you want to read them. But that finishes up our unfinished business from last week, and it means we can begin talking about the display of emotion on the face. People love to oversimplify nonverbal communication by saying emotional expressions are universal. We're going to tear a lot of holes in that idea. The idea that anywhere you go in the world, a smile is a smile and a frown is a frown, and that's the universal language. Well, actually, the first thing to say about that, even researchers who believe in what we'll call basic emotions theory, they agree that around the world there are different display rules. When you show an emotion, what kind of emotion it's okay to show, there's a lot of variety. And those rules go into 4 categories. Sometimes you are expected to show an emotion more intensely than you actually feel it. Now, these are cultural norms. Very often they are unwritten rules. Parents, grandparents, and other people who are around small children know almost instinctively that sometimes you need to show your emotion more strongly so the child will understand. The child draws you a picture, and so you show very intensely that you're so excited. The child falls down, skins their knee, and you show a very sad face to show that you understand that they're sad. Another example of the intensifying rule is what I'm doing right now. And we, in about 3 or 4 more weeks, are going to have a day where we talk about what kinds of nonverbals make you more effective as a presenter. And when you have to give a presentation to an audience, if I only had time to give you one bit of advice, I would say, be big, be energetic, be bigger than you are talking to a person who's 2 feet away from you. A lot of the bad speakers that you know who are boring, they talk to someone sitting halfway to the back of this classroom the same way they would talk to someone who's right here. And that's why boring people sound like this, because they're not big enough. So, be more intense when you talk to larger groups. A second display rule, sometimes you need to be less intense. Less intense. That one, a lot of places in the world, is the rule when you're at work, when you're on the job. If you get angry, stay calm. If you feel nervous, don't show it. If you get bad news and you're sad, keep it under control until you can go home and share it with your family. But whatever emotion you have, don't let all of it out. If you let it out at all, let out the mild version of it. Another example of this, some emotions, generally it's a good idea to show the milder version with your close loved ones, with your romantic partner, with your family members. Sometimes you might be so angry over something that they were involved in that you just want to yell. You just want to throw things. But you know that'll upset them, that will not do anything good for the relationship, and part of you feels like you need to be honest and tell them you're unhappy, but you give them the milder version, so the less intense version. The third common display rule, sometimes what you're expected to do is show no emotion at all. Be neutral. This is the rule when you don't want to draw attention to yourself. This is often the rule when someone is trying to manipulate you. I give this bit of advice because I teach a lot of students who are majoring in education, and they are eventually going to be teachers in high school, teenagers or pre-teenagers. And I tell them, sometimes you will have students who will misbehave for the sole purpose of trying to upset you, of trying to startle or surprise you. And so what you have to do, you have to be very good at watching students do outrageous things while you have no expression at all on your face. You just stand there and wait for them to be done. In English, an idiom we have for that is poker face, which was also a Lady Gaga song. But that's about when you play poker, you show nothing on your face because you don't want the other players to know whether you've got a good hand or a bad hand. The last of the display rules, sometimes you're expected to show a fake emotion. A fake emotion. There is a huge, huge research literature about emotional labor in the workplace. A lot of people at their jobs, especially if they sell, if they're in sales, or if they're waiting tables at a restaurant, they're expected to smile and look cheerful all the time. And that's not intensifying. It's not de-intensifying. It's not being neutral. It's putting an expression on your face that does not match the emotion you actually have. Another example of this, my favorite example, because usually students have at least one memory associated with this. Sometimes small children will misbehave in a way that's really funny, and you cannot laugh. Because if you laugh, they'll do it again. And so you have to fake, put on a very angry, and you're dying inside. You want to laugh so hard at the hilarious thing they just did. But if they're going to grow up and behave properly, they have to think that behavior is not okay. So you have to show a fake emotion. Now, the examples I've given are very limited. I only wanted you to get a grasp of what the rule is. But culture to culture, they vary a ton. Some emotions can be shown. Some emotions should be shown more. Some emotions should be shown less, depending on the cultural norm. One of the easiest examples, and I think one I used with you previously, it's widely taught in Russia. Don't smile just for the sake of seeming friendly or to make yourself more attractive. Smile only if everybody around you can see why you're smiling. Because if it looks like you're smiling for no reason, they may assume you're making fun of them. You're being disrespectful to them. So, if you feel naturally like smiling, you may be expected to use the less intense rule, tone it down. Or maybe even the neutral rule, hide it completely. And for lots of different cultures around the world, there are variations on that. So, those are the display rules. And I'm going to talk through one more topic before we have our first timeout for questions, because that was very abstract. This is going to be a lot more specific. And this is also where I get to start using some visuals. The Duchenne markers. Let me ask you a question. Does he look happy? Now does he look happy? In which one of those do you think he really feels happy? That one or that one? Does she feel happy? Now does she feel happy? In which one of those does she really feel happy? What you're seeing in both of these is the difference between what we call a Duchenne smile and a non-Duchenne smile. Duchenne, non-Duchenne. There are two muscles involved. There's the orbicularis oculi, the muscles surrounding the eyes. So with a Duchenne smile, her eyes are crinkled. With a non-Duchenne smile, the smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. The other muscle involved is the zygomatic major. In a Duchenne smile, your lips go up more sharply and you're more likely to dimple. In a non-Duchenne smile, your mouth turns up a bit, but the tension at the corners of the mouth is sharper in a Duchenne smile. And a lot of people will define a Duchenne smile as just that your eyes crinkle, the corners of your eyes crinkle, but it's actually both. It's the corners of the eyes and the corners of the mouth. The one other characteristic is that with a Duchenne smile, it comes on more slowly, it begins more slowly, and it fades more slowly. This kind of smile, the non-Duchenne smile, that's how you smile when someone takes a picture of you and says smile. And people tend to turn that smile on and turn it off, like you're turning on or turning off a light switch. But when people smile, motivated by a feeling of happiness, it fades in more slowly and it fades out more slowly because it's not tied to an event. They're not looking to see if you have a camera pointed at them. One interesting bit of research done regarding the Duchenne smile, and I just realized these visuals are in the wrong order, so let me back out of mentioning the interesting research. We'll get to it in a moment. The Duchenne marker, I called it the marker on the outline of the class because it also works for expressions of sadness, expressions of concern. Someone can tell you sad news, and you can mirror back to them sadness. Oh. I found out over the weekend, one of my colleagues, her mother just passed away. And when she told me that news, I gave her a sad face to be supportive. When we genuinely feel sadness, we tend to have tension at the corner of our eyes. Now, this particular phenomenon, the Duchenne marker, is often oversimplified. You are going to hear people tell you that a Duchenne smile cannot be faked, and that when someone smiles and they have wrinkles here and tension here, it means they're really happy. And that's not true at all. Duchenne smiles can be faked. Now, I will admit, the probability is higher when you see a smile that reaches their eyes and that makes them dimple. The probability is higher that they're really happy. But you could easily, in about 5 minutes, learn to fake a Duchenne smile. The way people do it is to think about something that makes them happy. Lots of people who do telemarketing work, who do sales over the telephone, they'll keep a picture of their child or their grandchild right in front of them, look at it, smile, feel happy, and dial the phone. But one interesting bit of research I was about to talk about before, which tells us a little bit about the wiring of the brain and how we handle emotion and why the two smiles look different. This research has been done by a number of researchers over the years with people who have survived what in English we call a stroke. Now, a stroke is a health event where tissue in your brain dies because blood was cut off. It usually happens for one of two reasons. Either a blood vessel in your brain was blocked, maybe by a blood clot, or a blood vessel in your brain ruptured. And when people survive having a stroke, one common side effect afterward is one side of their body can become paralyzed because of the part of the brain where the damage happened. And if that happens, commonly one side of their face becomes paralyzed. And they can smile, but only with half their face. They can move their eyes expressively, but only one eye, not the other one. The research that's been done that says some interesting things about smiles. Some people have impaired motor control. The region in their brain that's damaged by their stroke means that they can't move as smoothly. But there's no damage in those patients to another region called the anterior cingulate in the limbic system. The limbic system processes emotion. Here's the interesting part. If you ask someone who's got motor damage to smile while you take a picture, they'll look like this because they try to move their mouth and they can't. But if you tell them a joke and it's a funny joke and they begin to laugh because they're amused, that corner of the mouth will go up. And it looks like they are not a stroke patient at all. And when the way their brain operates is through the emotion processing region, then this suddenly works again. Other people have damage in the anterior cingulate in the limbic system. So what is impaired is their processing of emotion. And they have the exact opposite situation. You could point the camera at them and say, smile for the picture, and both sides of their mouth would go up. But if you told them a funny joke and they began to laugh, the mouth wouldn't move. The movement in the mouth would be uneven because there's impairment in processing emotion. What we think for that reason is that your expression of emotion on your face can be regulated by the emotion processing center of the brain through one pathway, and then in a completely independent pathway, you can voluntarily configure your face to make these expressions. And the two have nothing to do with each other, which is why you smile when someone points a camera at you and it looks one way. You have joy well up in you. You have happy feelings take over you. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't want to smile because you were embarrassed, but the smile just came over you and you couldn't stop it? That kind of smile exists, and it looks different because your brain is producing the smile two different ways: conscious motor control or the output of emotional sensation. All right. One other thing I decided to tuck in here, and I only decided it about a day or two ago, because this week in the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior, a special issue got published, and that special issue had some hot off the presses studies about smiling and about our next topic, which is laughter. And I thought you might be interested in the smiling study, partly because it was done by researchers at Kyoto University and Hokkaido University. And what they did, there's a database of facial expressions from people who did specific, volunteers for the study, participants in the study, who did specific tasks. And those tasks were designed to make them feel a certain way. Now that's vague, so let me make it more specific. Among the things that the volunteers were asked to do, one of them was to sing a silly nonsense song. And what the researchers wanted to do is they wanted to make the volunteer feel embarrassed. And so they videoed the volunteers singing this really, really dorky song. And then they got a lot of pictures of the volunteers smiling. But it was a specific kind of smile. It was an embarrassed smile. Now, another thing that some of the other volunteers did, they were asked to put their hand in a pan of water that was really, really cold. So cold that if it were a little colder, it would give them frostbite. And they were asked to keep it in there for about 20 or 30 seconds. Now, that's a common task used in research because it induces pain, but it's pain that's not likely to actually injure you, so it's ethical. And strangely enough, some of the volunteers, when they had their hand in the cold water, would smile. And those pictures were included in the database as a smile while in pain. And then finally, there were people who were told a series of jokes that had been scored very highly by other reviewers as very, very funny. And pictures were taken of them smiling right at the moment they understood the joke and began to laugh. And those smiles were all classified as amused smiles. And the team of researchers at Hokkaido and Kyoto University, they actually found there are measurable differences between an embarrassed smile, a pained smile, and an amused smile. And the big difference is, with amused smiles, your face stays relaxed. With the other two smiles, you're more likely to have very tight muscle tension all the way throughout your face. And I said previously, when talking about Duchenne smiles, that they come on slowly and that they vanish again slowly. But what these researchers found was embarrassed smiles are even slower. When you smile, even though you're embarrassed, it takes a while for the smile to come on. And there was some speculation that that was because you smiled defensively. You smile as a way to try to cope with the feeling of embarrassment, which is why it takes a while. You realize the situation is embarrassing, and once that's gone on for a few seconds, then maybe you smile. All right. Let us move from the Duchenne marker to talk about another nonverbal expression of emotion associated with, very similar to smiling. Commonly, what we start out smiling at, not universally, but commonly we wind up laughing at. Most of the work done on laughter as a form of nonverbal communication was done by a man named Robert Provine, who was a professor until he retired on the East Coast of the United States. And I'm going to give you some of the basics, and then we're going to talk about the same themes we talked about related to smiles. All human beings laugh. Everywhere we found humans, they laugh. Primates also laugh. Gorillas, chimpanzees, baboons all laugh. And interestingly, there's one researcher, retired a few years ago, but his name was Jaak Panksepp. I always found his work really fascinating, and you can find some of it on YouTube. He demonstrated rats laugh. Rats love to be tickled, and rats make a noise that when you hear it, it's absolutely indistinguishable from baby laughter. It's so high up in frequency that we can't hear it. But it can be recorded, and with the frequency translated down, there's no doubt what they're doing. Based on his work, there are other people in the field of affective neuroscience who are investigating whether other animals laugh. People recognize laughter cross-culturally more often than they recognize just about any other kind of emotional expression. Laughter does come very close to being universal. Babies laugh predictably from the time they're about 4 months old. And people, deaf, unable to hear, from the time they were born, they laugh as often and with the same variation as people who can hear. Some of the things that might surprise you, some of the things that Provine's research showed, he went around recording conversations and marking where people laughed and what happened right before the laugh. And if I were to ask you, I've asked a lot of students over the years, what do people laugh at? And they say, well, they laugh at jokes, they laugh at things that are funny. But if you actually observe where laughter happens in conversation, not in a stand-up comedy club or in a movie theater, but in conversation, usually what happens right before the laugh is not a joke and is not even recognizably funny. And the person most likely to laugh is the person who was speaking. Usually it's not the listeners who laugh. And then, we talked before about the smile that you make when someone takes a picture that does not look real, and then the smile that you make when you feel happy. Sophie Scott, who's at University College in London, she researches the exact same phenomenon with laughter. Because sometimes someone is being clever or witty, they say something goofy as part of participating in the conversation, and you laugh politely. And then sometimes you laugh because something is just funny, and you can't help it. And there are two things. She has a TED Talk, and she has several research presentations where you can see her demonstrate this. There are two ways you can tell the difference. The first is real laughter when something's funny to you is higher, much higher pitch. So if one of you said something goofy to me and I wanted to laugh politely, it might sound like this. Not very high. But I have this, and it's going to be hard for me to fake this, and I should not be able to fake it at all. But when something really amuses me, I'm going to have to take a second and draw up a memory that always makes me laugh. Do you hear the difference? That's a real laugh. Is a polite laugh. People's fake laughs are almost always lower. The other thing is, when you get really amused, that's when you will start making involuntary, helpless noises. People snort while they laugh. People sometimes, I hate to say this, but they oink while they laugh. That's an English word for the noise a pig makes. So if I really got going and I... Now that was fake. But you've heard people do it. You've heard people laugh so out of control that there are little noises mixed in. When people are really caught up in amusement, they will do that. Laughter is a release of tension. Laughter is a release of tension. And we could talk for longer than an hour about the psychology of humor. I once taught a special topics class only about humor and humorous communication. And one of the theories of humor is it's a release of tension. And one of the things that explains well is that people will sometimes begin laughing for things that make no sense. They'll laugh when they are startled. They'll laugh when they hear something they didn't expect. There have been mothers who found out their children had been killed and they began laughing. Laughing does not always mean we like what we heard. Laughing is sometimes just the release of tension in a way you didn't expect. I have one other study out of that special issue that I want to share with you, and then we're going to get to the main event of what I wanted to talk about today, which is basic emotions theory. But there was a team of researchers on the east coast of the United States, and they had this ingeniously simple study. Here's what they did. They recruited people to come and participate in the study who had been in a romantic relationship. They're dating someone, steadily dating someone for less than a year. So they had to have just gotten a girlfriend or boyfriend within the past year. Then when they came into the laboratory, they were asked to take out their phone and have a 5-minute conversation with the person they were dating and a second 5-minute conversation with their very best friend. And the researchers recorded both conversations. Now, predictably, a 5-minute conversation with someone you're close to, almost every time they laughed at least once. And the researchers clipped out the laugh with the person they were dating, and the laugh with their best friend. And then they recruited other participants to listen to both of those laughs, and they asked 2 questions. Scale of 1 to 10, how nice is that laugh? How pleasant, how enjoyable is that laugh to listen to? And then the second question was, is this person laughing with a friend or with someone they're dating? And the participants in the study who listened to the laughs could tell. They could tell whether they were laughing with their girlfriend or boyfriend or laughing with their best friend. And furthermore, the laugh with the best friend always rated very highly in how pleasant it was, how nice it was. But the laugh with the person they were dating rated very low. They didn't like hearing the laugh with the person they were dating. And what the researchers said might be true. Laughing to release tension is something you do with your friends. Laughing to be close, to be supportive, and show emotional closeness, that's something you do with someone you're dating. And those laughs are a lot more likely to be fake. And just the fact that people reliably could pick which one it was is more evidence there is a big distinction. All right, all of that is building up Oh, and I meant to have this up while we were talking about laughing, but that's the only visual I plan to have up, so the fact that I forgot it is not that big a deal. That brings us now to something I've been talking about since the first class meeting. Facial prototypes. Let me tell you what a facial prototype is. It is the shape or the gesture on your face that is commonly associated with an emotion. It's commonly associated with the emotion. People easily decode it as that emotion. And sometimes you deliberately put that gesture on your face to send that emotion. Easiest example, a smile is the facial prototype associated with happiness. You want to convey happiness, you smile. A frown, an angry frown, is the facial prototype, obviously, associated with anger. There is such thing as a thinking frown, a concentrating frown, a confused frown, but angry frowns tend to look different. So now let me show you the facial prototypes associated with what basic emotions theory researchers say are the basic emotions. I deliberately am not showing you the labels. I will get to that. But let's warm up with some easy ones. That one. In all three rows, you know what that emotion is, right? That's a smile. That's for being happy. This one's also fairly easy, especially if you look at the top row. I think she's just better than the other two. But they put the other two in for variety. But now one interesting thing that comes out of basic emotions theory research, what if before I showed you that face, what if I told you a story? There was a very badly behaved child. And the badly behaved child walked into the room, grabbed the person's phone, threw it on the floor so it broke, and then started laughing. And the person showed that facial expression. Now at that point, what emotion do you think you see, especially in the top row? And I will relieve you of your suspense in about 1 more minute. But the last one I want to direct your attention to is that one. That's the emotion that was most recently added by basic emotions theorists. And when we talk about the problems with this research in a few minutes, this is going to come up again. So now, let me show you the labels. In case you're too far away and it's hard to see, happiness, sadness, disgust, surprise, contempt, anger, and fear. Now we looked at happiness first, and boy was that easy. We looked at anger. She looks pretty angry. But then I told you the story of the badly behaved child smashing the phone and that expression. And in experimental conditions, when they were told that story and shown that expression, they thought it was an expression of fury, of very intense anger. But look at what it is. It's fear. The emotional prototype, the face of someone who's afraid, if you hear a story behind it, it's easy to confuse it with anger. And I teach a conflict class. People often misread the emotion they're seeing. They see anger when what the person showing the emotion is feeling is fear. They're easily confused. And then this one. This is the one that was added most recently, contempt. If the word is not familiar, it is the feeling that the person you are talking about, thinking about, or talking to is beneath you. They are so undeserving of respect that contempt. They're just low. It's not a good emotion to have. Incidentally, Here we have, from the Japanese Female Facial Expression Database, the basic emotions. You'll notice contempt is not up there because it's a recent addition, and this database was put together, I want to say, back in the 1970s. And I want to park here and talk for a few minutes about the problems with facial prototype research. And after I've talked about those problems, I'm going to walk you through a study that was done here in Japan for a demonstration. And then after we've demonstrated that problem, there's an alternate theory. Okay, first thing. There are lots of studies. What they do, what basic emotions theory researchers do, is they'll take one of these pictures with no label, and they'll show it to participants in the study and say, what is this emotion? And if, in the original work, if more than 50% agreed on it, then they said that's a universal facial expression. More than 50%. That's not very many. More recent work has said if more than 70%, 70 out of every 100 agree, then that's a universal emotional expression. But the problem is, they would show an expression like this and they would say, is this fear or happiness or disgust? And they would pick labels that are not at all likely. I mean, is that a happy face? What they would do is they would offer forced choice. They would say, from these options, which emotion is that? Other researchers have come along since then and have just shown the picture and invited an open-ended response. Just said, what is this? And they get very, very different responses. A second thing to say about basic emotions theory, people are a lot more reliable when they are looking at an emotion they see a lot of the time. So if you do your basic emotions study and you show a face of fear to people who've lived in a war zone, they recognize fear because they see it a lot. If you do it, and this experiment's been done and replicated many times, people who grew up in a violent household where there was physical abuse, boy, do they recognize anger. They will see even little, very subtle signs of anger, but they're terrible at recognizing happiness because they don't see it very often. So we are attuned to emotions that we are exposed to repeatedly. I said previously, to go back for a moment, that this was the one that was going to show up when we talked about the problems with the research. If people are given this face and asked, is that a happy face or a surprised face or a scared face or a face of contempt, they'll say, oh, it's contempt. Very high accuracy, which is why researchers started reporting it's a universal emotion. But if you just show people that face with no label and say, what's that emotion? Nobody agrees. The accuracy is very low. They will agree that it's negative. They will agree it's not a happy face. They will agree it's not, the level of arousal is not very high. They're not furious. It's kind of a low-key emotion, and that's all they'll agree on. Some say contempt, some say annoyed, some say impatient, some say bored. Very little agreement. The final thing to say about problems with basic emotions theory is a point we made about 3 weeks ago when we were talking about gestures. And I showed you very briefly affect displays. And a clenched fist showed anger. And a person sitting bent over showed sadness. People are actually more accurate under a lot of circumstances reading emotion from posture and muscle tone than face. And researchers have speculated that may be because when you're trying to hide your emotion, you pay attention to your face and you try to keep it off your face. But people forget that other parts of their body show their emotions too. And we are not as good at monitoring what our posture and what our muscle tone is doing. Your face muscles are very, very precise, and you spend most of your life using them in very flexible ways. But we don't pay as much attention to what our hands and arms and legs and feet are doing as expressions of emotion. All right, now for our demonstration. This was done by a professor named Wataru Sato and his collaborators from Kyoto University. Here's what they did, and I think it's wonderful. They first of all took a one-sentence story that, if it happened to you, would make you feel a certain way. For example, something you have wanted for years and years and years, and you've worked and saved money for, your best friend gives it to you as a birthday present. They gave them that one-line story to induce happy. And what they did is they read them the one-line story and they said, please show us the facial expression you would have if that happened. And they put an iPad in front of them with the camera turned on so they could see themselves in the iPad. And they said, practice your facial expression until you're sure it's how you would look. Watch the iPad while you do it. And when you're ready, tell us, and we're going to photograph it. And then what I'm going to show you is a composite photo of all the participants in the study. So they read them the one-line story, had them show the facial expression with all the practice they wanted until they were sure it was the right face. Then, the same participant was handed a picture from that database we keep looking at, and they were asked, would you imitate that picture, please? And they did their best while looking at the iPad to make the same expression on their face. This part of the study was because some researchers have speculated in different parts of the world there are anatomical differences. People's bodies work differently. It might be that people in Japan just have different face muscles and cannot make certain facial expressions. So they tested it. And so what you're going to see with each of these, you're going to see the facial expression that the participants made after they heard the story. Then I'm going to show you the face they made when they imitated the prototype. And then I'm going to reveal to you what the emotion was. But what we're going to do each time, and I'll start with the first one, I want you to tell me, not tell me, but I actually do want you to jot this down because I want you to commit. What emotion is that? Don't say it out loud because other people are thinking, but just jot it down because I want you to actually commit to one. Has everyone got one? This is the composite photo of the faces people produced in response to this prompt. Your very best friend is moving away to a city so far away that you'll never see them again. This was the prototype they were asked to imitate, and the emotion was sadness. Now, when you just saw the unlabeled face, maybe some of you picked sadness. Maybe you saw it. Boy, is it more subtle than the prototype. Let me show you a second one. What emotion is that? Okay, you got the one you want? The prompt that they were given, imagine that you really, really feel uncomfortable being alone in a dark room, and now imagine you're in your house by yourself and every light goes off. The prototype they were asked to imitate was that, and the emotion was fear. Did you see fear when it was completely unlabeled? there is a point to this. It's not just going to be the same thing over and over again. What emotion is that? You got the one you want? Okay. The prompt they were given was, you walk into your kitchen and suddenly you smell the trash and it smells really bad. This was the prototype they imitated, and it was disgust. Did we get disgust when it was unlabeled? 3 more. What's that? The prompt they were given for this one was, whatever your pet peeve is, the thing that you hate it when people do, someone walks right up to you and does it. And this was the prototype, and the emotion was anger. Last 2. What emotion is that? For this one, the prompt was, you pick up an empty box, and it's not empty. A kitten jumps out into your lap. And this was what they imitated, and it was surprise. Now, that one was not that hard, was it? And just to end strong, what's that one? The prompt for this one was, I already gave it away, there's something you've been working and saving for years, and your friend gives it to you as a birthday present, and this was the prototype that they imitated, and the emotion was happiness. Now we're about to talk about the alternate theory that challenges basic emotions theory. But what I want to mention, there are problems with basic emotions theory, but I don't want you to think that I'm saying they're completely wrong. Smiles, pretty much anywhere you go in the world, a smile does convey happiness. Does that mean if you see someone smiling, they are happy? No. They may have social purposes for displaying a smile. Sometimes their boss expects it. Sometimes their family expects it. Sometimes they're trying to get you to let your guard down so they can pick your pocket. But it does convey the impression of happiness pretty much the world around. But those first couple of pictures that we looked at, could you tell that easily what the emotion was when it was unlabeled? Lots and lots of participants produced the most accurate face they could, and they made a composite of it, and possibly you had a perfect score on all 6, but it would surprise me if you did. All right. The theory that challenges basic emotions theory is called behavioral ecology. Behavioral ecology. It is the work of a researcher, primarily the work of a researcher who started out his career being a basic emotions theorist. He came to the point where he no longer believed it because of the problems with the way the data was being collected. His name is Fridland, Alan Fridland. Basic emotion theorists say that we show certain facial expressions when we feel a certain way because emotion is displayed biologically. The same way when something irritates the inside of your nose, you sneeze, that's just your body regulating itself. Basic emotions theory people say your body regulates itself and shows a smile when you're happy and a frown when you're angry and so forth. And Fridlund challenges that. One of the first things he says is, you sneeze if something's in your nose when you're all alone in an empty room. But we don't smile, or not as much. We don't frown as much when we experience an emotion and nobody else is there. We show these prototypes when someone is there to see them. And his theory is facial gestures or facial prototypes, they operate kind of like language. He says your facial expression doesn't show how you're feeling inside. It shows that someone just did something and you are either responding or you want something to happen. We use them, he says, to navigate social situations. Sometimes we smile because we're happy. Sometimes we smile because we want to look friendly to other people. Sometimes we smile because someone is angry at us and we want to appease them. His whole development of behavioral ecology is that each of these facial gestures sends a signal. Smiles tend to show, I want to gather closer together with other people to do something positive. A sad face shows other people, I need for someone to comfort me. An angry face shows other people, I need for you to back down or back away. Either I am dominating, trying to dominate you, or I'm trying to get you to stop being aggressive to me. Fearful faces, a face that shows you're afraid, shows that you are submitting, and it's meant to stop an attack. And neutral faces are meant to pause whatever interaction is going on so it doesn't go further. I showed you the prototypes and said that basic emotion theorists have had a lot of people say what the emotion is and label it, and they claim high accuracy. He's run the same studies. But what he does in his study is he'll show a smiling face and say, what's the next thing the person's going to do? Get together with other people to do something positive, go off by themselves, pick a fight with other people, and consistently, the participants will choose get together with other people to do something positive. So they're just as accurate in labeling what the meaning of the expression is and what it's likely to do in the interaction. He has a story that he tells, and this story, I think, brings behavioral ecology theory very much into focus. So let's imagine there's a wife and a husband, and we'll name the wife Jan, and we'll name the husband Bob. Jan and Bob are at a picnic for the company, or we'll say a party for the company that Jan works at. Now, Bob doesn't know anybody there. And Bob has been there all evening trying to make conversation. It kind of doesn't go anywhere. And the party is almost over. And Jan comes walking up to him, and her boss is right behind her. And Jan says, Bob, great news. We've been invited over to my boss's house right afterward to spend the evening with them. And Bob smiles and says, that's great, let's go. But then when he tells the story, Fridlund says, imagine Jan walked over and said the same thing, but her boss wasn't behind her. She just walked up to her husband Bob alone and said, great news, we've been invited over to my boss's house to spend the evening. He would say to her, I'm tired, do we have to go? And in that story, Fridlund says, a basic emotion theorist would say the smile was fake, and the I'm tired, do we have to go was real. And Fridlund says that's not true. When Bob smiled and sounded excited, he genuinely wanted to support his wife. That wasn't fake. That was a message, and he meant it. Now, did he at the same time have a feeling of, this is making me tired, this is a lot of work? Yes, he had that feeling at the same time. But Fridlund says we don't feel one emotion at one time. We have lots of motives together, and we use our facial expressions to send the message in the moment, and often a complicated message. Now, the basic emotions theorists, they have a few answers to this. They say, even if we use our facial expressions to send messages in the complicated way Fridland and his colleagues like to say, we're still borrowing from a system we learned from other people. A smile still means happiness because people smiled before us. It is a lot like language. I was thinking a lot about this, and I stumbled upon this word, which I think everybody in here, if you know any English, you know this word and you know what it means. And I was thinking very hard. I'm more than 50 years old. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say this word. We use this word. We recognize this word. I read it in stories. I see it written. Nobody ever, and I mean ever, says goodbye. People will say, bye. See ya. Oh, are you leaving? Yeah, I'm leaving. See you later. The only time you would ever say this word in this form is if someone was not understanding that you wanted them to leave, you might finally look at them and say, goodbye. And it would be like talking to an obtuse child. We don't use that word. We use variations on it. Now, why do I tell you this? When people are happy, do they smile like a cartoon character? Usually not. But the things they do are variations on the smile, and the smile is still meaningful. The smile is the core meaning. It's the one people instantly recognize. We don't necessarily use it all the time. But what we do use to signal the same thing is a variation on something that is recognizable. So those facial prototypes, maybe we don't use them all the time. Maybe we use variations, flexible variations on them when we interact. But where we come to from that is that the basic emotions theorists, they have a point. It is meaningful to call something a facial prototype and say, this face looks like fear. This face looks like anger. Even if people don't always show the angry face when they feel angry, it's still meaningful. It's like the dictionary version of the word. And as you saw, some of the emotions in the Sato study were very recognizable, and the basic emotions theorists appeared to have a point. And others of the emotions, not at all, and it seemed like the behavioral ecologists had a point. Really, what I want you to take away from this is true of almost all social science. When you hear a bold claim being made as though it's always true and is very simple, it's probably being exaggerated. I'm going to editorialize for just a minute or two, and then I will open the floor for questions about any of this, and we'll start to wrap class up. In the United States, there are a lot of people these days who like to diagnose themselves as introverts. I'm an introvert. No, you're not. No, you're not. I don't think I've met 5 introverts in my life. Because what the research shows us is it depends on where you are and who you're with. And it changes from situation to situation. We used to, in my field, say that people, in the listening research, people have a listening style. No, they don't. No, they really don't. People have a listening style for the workplace, a different one for their family, a different one for their friends. We are very flexible and goal-directed when it comes to how we communicate. So do we have one and only one way of showing various emotions? No, we do not. But do we have some fundamental ways that are easily recognizable, and then do we make up our own variations on those ways? Yes, we do. Is it meaningful to recognize the prototypes? Sure. Should we have enough flexibility in our thinking to understand that people improvise? And in specific situations, people will do what might not be expected? Yes. So does Fridland have a point? Yes. And do the basic emotions theorists? Sure, their work is also useful. But if anyone ever tries to tell you, anywhere you go in the world, a smile means the same thing, you slap them across the face, because that is just absolutely not true. Don't do that, that'd be violent. But don't accept generalizations like that when it comes to nonverbal communication. All right, That got me to the end of things that I wanted to say about any of that. So now I'm going to call time out. And anything you want to ask me about any of these topics, floor is open. Yes, ma'am.
There's a thing called an MBTI.
Yes, Myers-Briggs.
But if there's no introvert, then is that fake?
Yes. The question was, the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, if there's no introvert, is that fake? My answer to the question, is it fake, is absolutely yes. The Myers-Briggs is garbage. The Myers-Briggs is junk science. It's an okay game to play with your friends to start a conversation, but the Myers-Briggs, in its original form, was designed by a mother and daughter based on how they thought the world kind of probably was, sitting in a room together chatting. And there are people who make money off administering the Myers-Briggs and interpreting it, and they will write academic articles that are junk science and publish them in journals that are established just to publish Myers-Briggs research, and it's hogwash. It doesn't correlate with anything. But it makes people money, so they keep promulgating it. Yeah, I would never take the Myers-Briggs seriously. You're very welcome. I thought I saw a hand brewing to come up over here, but maybe I'm wrong, and I don't want to lean on anybody. Does anyone else have a question? I promise I won't get quite as heated as that one. I just have a thing about the Myers-Briggs, as you can tell. Then what I will do, I will end class with what I said a long time ago I'm going to end class with every time. You will get your last 10 minutes back to beat everybody to the lunch line. Shuga anata o shukufukushi anata o mamoremasu yoni. Shuga miko o anata ni terashi anata o megumarimasu yoni. Shuga miko o anata ni muke anata ni heiano atairaremasu yoni. Class is dismissed. I will see you next week.